Welcome to the NYU Steinhardt Jazz Interview Series, and tonight we have legendary vibraphonist, composer, band leader, producer, arranger, man about town, Mr. Mike Mainieri.
Nice to be here.
So we have a lot of information to get through, so we're going to move quickly.
How quick?
Not too quick, not as quickly as that
we're
history class.
8 decades here.
8 decades.
I just turned 80.
Wow.
In July. July 4th.
July 4th?
Yes.
Ah. Okay. Well, so you didn't just turn 80 then? You just,
yes, past July 4th.
Okay. There's many periods of music that you've been involved with, but I want to talk about you growing up in New York and I guess a Jewish Italian family, and you're kind of in vaudeville, in fact, right? You start off your family, or let's talk about it.
I was born in the Bronx in a sort of a very, what they now call ghettos, but it was a very poor neighborhood. We lived on the 5th floor, which now, of course, you pay much more money for living on a 5th floor, but then you paid less. You paid less money because it was a walk-up. And my family, it was about 9 people living in 3 rooms. It was the Depression, and they were really into jazz. They loved jazz, and that was the music that we were listening to on the radio.
Was that your parents and your grandparents?
My father was a tap dancer, so was his brother. They had a little team. They used to play some of the vaudeville gigs. I had one uncle who was a singer-songwriter. In the 20s, played in all the speakeasies. And 2 other uncles who played several instruments, as we were talking about before. He played drums, saxophone. And my step-grandfather, who was a really great rhythm guitarist, who was really instrumental in me learning harmony and how to play changes and inversions and stuff like that. So it was, and we would put on these sort of I should say, fake radio shows on the weekends. We'd all gather together, even some other relatives. And I had one uncle who would announce the show, and everyone would sing or dance. And when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I started playing the vibes, and he'd feature. And now Mike Mainieri, was going to play Stardust, and my step-grandfather would accompany me. Later on, my brother started playing guitar.
How did the vibes show up in your apartment?
My mother, of course, she just said, put away the glove and the stickball bat. I want you to play the vibraphone. I said, the vibraphone, like Hampton, because I knew who Hampton was. She said, no, I've been listening to Marjorie Himes on the radio. Now, Marjorie Himes was I think she was the first vibraphonist to play with George Shearing. And she had a radio show out of Chicago. And it was a really mellow kind of jazz. And my mother loved it, and she thought I should play this instrument, which we could not afford at all. And my father said, are you crazy? Where do we buy a vibraphone and how much does it cost? She said, don't worry about it. She went to work in a sweatshop for about 2 years, saved all the money, and bought me my first 2.5 octave vibraphone. Actually, the resonators were made out of cardboard.
Wow.
It was made during the war when they were trying to save metal for the war. A Deegan vibraphone.
Surprising that they even had a vibraphone, because all those instruments were collected for the war effort.
Yeah, just the last resonator was made out of metal. The rest of them were cardboard.
Was it new, or was it a?
It was used. It was used.
But how do you gain? I mean, we're in an academic experience here. Everything is like prescribed. This is how you play music. It's chords and scales. How did you do it back then?
Well, I was born on the kitchen table. I was. My mother, we were poor, we couldn't afford a doctor and all that, so it was midwife kitchen table, and what was playing in the next room, it was Django Reinhardt. My grandfather was really into Django, being a guitar player. So like from when I was, the day I was born, and because my family were into jazz, they loved jazz, I was constantly listening to, you know, whether it be Goodman or Ellington, Basie. And then as I became a little older, like 6, 7, 8 years old, they take me to Broadway, the Broadway shows, get to hear the Dorseys. You know, this is the 40s. So like, I was surrounded by all this amazing music, and somehow I internalized it. And when I started taking lessons at about 10 or 11 years old, my mother found a vibraphone teacher for me. I don't know how, you know, I never really found out the truth. But anyway, we had to take 3 subways to get all the way down to the Bowery, where this vibraphonist by the name of Lem Leach lived in a funky one-room. He was completely alcoholic. And she'd bang on the door and she'd say to me, "Michael, you wait outside. I have to go." My mother was really a tough gal. And she'd have to go in there and sort of shake him out of his, you know, his drunkenness, you know. And she'd bring some wine also, a bottle of wine and $3 for a lesson.
How did she find him?
I don't know how she actually found him. She might have found him through, because we had some connections, but we were talking about Adrian Rollini. So it might have been Rollini saying, "I know this vibraphonist, you know, who's teaching now." And he's the one that, taught me to play in this sort of weird grip that I use, the Mainieri grip. And so my first lesson was 2-5, you know, 2-5, it was T for 2. And I was, you know, and of course it modulates, and you're in the key of C. It's an A flat, then you're in C, and you're playing 2 5s, right?
So,
and I just took to it right away. And he said, "Now you can improvise on this." And I didn't really know too many scales. I had taken a few piano lessons, and so I had gone through, played a little Bach, you know, but I could hear within 2 or 3 lessons the idea of improvising. And because I was also tap dancing, rhythmically, it felt pretty natural. You know, usually when kids are learning to play, you know, improvise, rhythmically, they're all over the place. I had really good time, you know, from the get-go.
How old were you when you took your first vibes lesson?
I must have been about 11 or 12, I think. And I'm not bragging, within 2 years, I had put together a trio called 2 Kings and a Queen. It was a bass player who was 16, I was 14, and a young lady who was a really good guitar player, she was 16. And we auditioned for the Paul Whiteman television show. And we won, you know, it was like a contest. So I had to join the union. So I was a union member. I've been a union member from, I don't know if anybody joins the union anymore, I doubt it, from 1952. And I started doing all these kids' television shows, like Gadd. Even if you've ever interviewed Gadd, or say Gene Bertoncini, guitarist who I grew up with. That's what we did to get out of the ghetto, was to just either we became an athlete, a boxer, you know, or a musician.
And what TV shows were you on?
Kids and Company, The Children's Hour, which was every Sunday morning. That was a big show. We did all of those.
So you were just a
Mickey
guest
Mouse
act.
Club. What?
You were just an act that they...
We were an act, and then with Whiteman, because we had won so many weeks in a row, we started doing his radio show, and then we did some little touring gigs with him. We were sort of a unique little trio, you know. It's just like, I was this big, you know. It's like just... like
so did Paul Whiteman talk to you?
Yeah.
So,
Pops.
well, we talk about Whiteman in my history class. And,
But
we talk about him in the 1920s.
It's so wonderful that you're doing that. I didn't mean to interrupt you. But you mentioned that you're teaching a course in the history of jazz. So, like, I do a lot of these workshops all over the world, and I'll mention Paul Whiteman, and I'll look out there and I'll just see faces. I have no idea who Paul Whiteman is. And then even, you know, closer to the 40s and 50s of musicians that I've played with, young people just really have no idea who these, who these amazing musicians are, like Adrian Rollini.
Right. We were talking about, just for my students here, we were talking about Adrian Rollini, and for you guys that are in my class, you know that he was a bass saxophonist in the 20s, like the premier bass saxophonist.
He was the cat.
That functioned as the bass player.
He was on quite a few records, too.
Right. But the thing that's not well known is that later on, when the bass saxophone became passé, he switched to vibraphone. But we might think that it's crazy for a saxophonist to play vibraphone. But we were talking before the swing era, before big bands stylized and categorized musicians, and you're going to be a trombone player, you're going to be a saxophone player, right. You're no longer a pianist or violinist. This is when people started to move away from playing multiple instruments.
It's true. When you asked me, do you know who Adrian Rollini is?
Yeah.
I answered, I went to see him when I was like 15 or 16 years old. I still have a little card from the that they put on the table, the Adrian Rollini trio. And I walked in with my father and my brother, who also played guitar, as I mentioned. And Rollini was playing piano. He had a guitarist, the bass player, and a piano. He had a set of vibes here and a set of chimes behind him. So he not only played an amazing bass saxophonist, but he basically really came up with the what they call the Burton technique, because he played with 4 mallets all the time and never looked at the keys. He just would play all of this amazing stuff with the lead mallet up here, and then played with 2 chime mallets, would play solos on the chimes. It was really fun.
Well, you know what's interesting about that? When you see Sonny Greer playing with pictures of him playing with Duke Ellington, there's always chimes behind
timpani him. Sometimes have gone, yeah.
But I don't recall ever hearing any recordings where he's actually playing chimes.
Well, Whiteman had all of that, and of course, Whiteman had a huge percussion section.
Mm-hmm. When Lionel Hampton played with Benny Goodman, it was kind of revolutionary, because at that time, the big band era had become the pop music of the day, right? And so when he brought that new instrument in, it was kind of like he really modernized, came up with a new gimmick, maybe, and that brought the vibraphone into the swing era, I think, and maybe Red Norvo. But do you know what Artie Shaw did to counteract the vibraphone? So we're thinking about, we don't have electronics yet, so what is it that you can add to your group that will make a splash like the vibraphone did? And Artie did it with a group called the Gramercy 5.
Oh, really? So that was his hook.
But what was the instrument?
Oh, I have no idea.
It was, are you ready? Johnny Guarneri playing harpsichord.
You gotta be kidding.
No.
He was my neighbor in the Bronx.
Really?
He was, yeah, for a while, and then he moved, of course.
Did you know him in the Bronx?
No, I didn't. He was much older
sure.
than I, but I knew his family.
But there's a ton of records out there. The Gramercy 5 with harpsichord.
That is totally wild. I didn't know that.
So, all right. Thank you. Good night.
Okay. Nice seeing you.
Now, I want to move. I know your parents were showbiz people, and they were helping to promote you. And I've talked to you in the past about this too. It's like when your parents took you to see Buddy Rich. How old were you?
Well, they didn't take me, actually. One of the older musicians that I used to hire, I think that's where I was headed, is how I managed to work my way into a situation where I met Buddy. Mm-hmm. And the drummer that I was working with, it was in his 40s. I'm like 19. And he was a really good friend of Buddy's. As a matter of fact, I think he followed Buddy on one of the big bands. I don't know if it was Harry James' band or the Dorsey band. And he kept telling Buddy, you got to hear this kid, Mike Mainieri. He's a really great vibes player. And they just hounded him for about a year. And Buddy used to go all the way to the Bronx to have a nice big Italian dinner with this guy, Pete Folo. And he said, I don't need a the last vibe player drove me crazy. It was Terry Gibbs. He said, I don't need another vibes player in the band. And he kept bugging him. Long story short, Buddy was doing a gig, I believe it was at the Village Gate. It was down in the Village. And he said, all right, have the kid come down. I'm going to do like 3 shows, and we'll just have him sit in.
And there was a vibraphone there?
No, I brought it from the house. I packed it up and put it in my father's wagon, station wagon. And where I lost that train of thought was I made enough money to move my family by the time I was 18 out of the Bronx and bought him a house in Yonkers, and I bought my father a car. And not bragging, but it all sort of kind of worked out. So Dad got the station wagon. He would take me to all the gigs, took me down for the Buddy Rich audition, and he made me wait till the 3rd set, of course. And it was a packed house. And said, there's a kid in the audience there, and he's wearing a suit that looks like a zoot suit that looks like he borrowed it from his father. Says he can play the vibes, in typical Buddy Rich manner. He's caustic, and acerbic. He says, all right, kid, why don't you come up? So we schlepped the vibes up on the stage, and he, in the first tune, Cherokee. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba, 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 ba. We played the head. He says, you got it. And I was like 40 choruses later. I'm still playing.
Wow.
And so after I finished my solo, the entire audience stood up, gave me a standing ovation, and then he said, well, I guess I got to hire this guy. And there I was. I was like a week later, I was playing at Birdland, opposite, it wasn't the Jazz Messengers, it was Horace Silver. Because they always had 2 bands.
This was a small group with Buddy?
Yeah, I only played with a small group. I never played with a big band. No, just didn't want to be a part of that. That came later. When he, like in the late 60s, he started.
So what year was this? This
is like 59, I think, or 58, somewhere in there.
So 58, 59, that was a really seminal period in jazz with all the kind of blue, giant steps, all these things.
That one year,
out.
Yeah. That I was listening. I just did something with the WDR band in Cologne, not to just go like this, but Bob Mincer was doing all the arrangements, and we were just listing all the albums that came out in '59, and we just could not believe, because we were trying to choose pieces from that year. And it was pretty amazing. You ought to check it out. It's just...
So, did you have time to go hear other music when you weren't playing?
Well, I did, and what was great about Birdland, playing at Birdland, or playing with Rich in those days, or playing with Blakey or Miles, whatever, any of those groups that were busy, is that now you're just constantly doing one-nighters, usually. You're lucky if you got a week at Birdland, like we'll do that in New York. But then it was 3 weeks at Birdland, and then you go down to Philly and play at Pep's for 2 weeks. Go down to Washington, or Baltimore, play a week. Go to Washington, D.C., play a week. Go to Atlanta. There was a Peachtree Lounge, and play a week there in Miami. Make your way to New Orleans, to Kansas City. It was a week. 2 weeks at Baker's Keyboard Lounge in Detroit. Go to Chicago, at Blue Note in Chicago for 2-3 weeks. And by the time you just went around the country, you'd be right back at Birdland, 6 months later. So, yes, and then usually there were 2 bands, which was amazing, because every time I played Birdland. How many
sets per night?
A lot of sets.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like 8:30 to about 3 in the morning.
Wow.
And Buddy hated playing the last set, so you'd always have, either be Philly Joe would sit in, Papa Joe, and Shaughnessy, all these great drummers would come in, because they came in to hear Buddy, and they would sit in. And so he'd split. Jerry Mulligan would sit in, usually on alto saxophone, sorry to say, but it's just like absolutely, the worst. Because he was, hitting the bottle. But when he played baritone, that was, of course, lovely.
So, who were the other musicians you go out and see? Did you get to see like Coltrane and Miles and all those guys?
Well, I saw Coltrane and Miles at Birdland, but I would go down to other clubs and got a chance earlier to play with do a high society gig with Billie Holiday. That was nice with Ruby. I don't know if you know who Ruby Braff.
Yeah,
is.
sure.
Trumpet player. He used to put together these.
Cornet? Did he play?
Yeah,
cornet?
he played cornet, and he called me up to do something. This was earlier than Buddy Rich, as a matter of fact. But I don't know why I dropped in there, but you got a chance to see Ella or whoever was in town. Whoever was playing on 52nd Street.
So Ruby hired you, and she.
Yeah,
was...
Ruby hired me. And it was a society gig. There were two of them. One was at the Roosevelt Hotel. I don't know if it was there then, in a ballroom. And it was Papa Joe on drums. I was subbing for Milt Jackson, who couldn't make the gig. I was just a young guy. And let me see, who was on bass? It's hard to remember all these people. I know it was Tyree Glenn was playing trombone. Remember that name? Not Ben Webster, but Hawk was playing saxophone. Pretty wild, right?
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, and drums, bass. I'm trying to think. Milt Hinton was playing bass, and Ruby, and myself. But the piano player was either like John Bunch or Marty Napoleon, or one of those guys, one of the older cats. And we did two gigs. We did one there and one on a yacht up in Connecticut with Ruby in the same.
And Billie Holiday was.
Billie Holiday was just at the Roosevelt Hotel. They snuck her in. She sang two songs, sat on a stool, sang two songs, and just whisked her away. And
wow. Well, question for you. You're getting these gigs as a vibraphonist. Was part of that in the 40s and 50s, there were very few vibraphonists? Was it hard to find somebody else? It was a short list?
It was a pretty short list in New York.
Because I was talking to John Abercrombie years ago, and he was saying when he moved to New York in the 60s, he said there was like 5 guitar players that could handle playing with a wah-wah pedal and playing the new fusion type music.
In the 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a short list. And a lot of those guys played in my White Elephant band. That album, we can talk about that later. Yeah.
So there's a lot to talk about, but I want to move quickly to how I first got to know your music, and that was with your group Steps Ahead.
Oh, we're going to just go through a couple of decades.
We're going to come back.
No, sorry. Let's go wherever you want to go.
Because that seems to be so, it's like the people that know Steps Ahead and Mike Brecker and Don Grolnick and Steve Gadd and Eddie Gomez, I don't associate you with Milt Hinton and Coleman Hawkins and Billie Holiday.
Right.
Most people would not. I think this is why we're here tonight, to show that you've had eight decades of. I don't know if all 8 were amazing, but.
I kind of lucked out with Steps Ahead in the sense that I joined the band in the `60s when the music started changing, folk jazz, folk rock. And I started playing with Jeremy Steig, who was a flautist. It was an electric band. Warren Bernhardt, Eddie Gomez was in the band. And
did Jeremy Steig play with Bill Evans because of Eddie?
Well, they were friends, and so was Warren Bernhardt. Warren Bernhardt was rooming. He was a great pianist who has just turned 80 also. So very good friend of mine. And Warren played. We played together for many years. But Warren and Bill Evans roomed together. And Eddie was a very good friend of Warren's, and that's how we all met. And Eddie was playing with Jeremy and invited me, and also Joe Beck, guitarist, was playing with Jeremy. So that's sort of that time, the early 60s, middle 60s, it was Larry Coryell's group. I forget the name. He had a name for his group. It was right before he joined Gary Burton's group. And Gary's group. This was pre-Bitches Brew. So like that music, that fusion, whatever they call it, fusion a little later, but the jazz rock sort of mixing different genres really happened in the 60s. And how I lucked out was because I stayed in New York. I stopped touring after Buddy Rich. This is like 64. And I became an arranger. Because I was arranging for Buddy, I started arranging for TV commercials and for record dates and stuff like that. And I had so much work. I mean, there was so much work in New York. I'm looking at it, all your students. I mean, one week I did 33 dates, I'll never forget. 33 sessions.
Producing or?
Producing, playing on TV jingles, writing, and everything. It was just, and it was like that every day for years. For all of the cats, you'd be sitting next to Bobby Brookmeyer, Kay Winding, you know, J.J. Johnson, Jerome Richardson, Snooki, you know, Thad Jones. I mean, and we were just playing on a, you know, deodorant commercial, you know, and at night we'd be playing with Wes Montgomery or somebody. So it was like this amazing time. But I would go down to the Village, you know, because I was playing with Jeremy Stein. We backed up this folk singer, Tim Hardin. We started traveling in the sort of the folk circles in the 60s. And I got interested in that genre. You know, I electrified the vibes, I amplified the vibes, invented that pickup system. And because I was doing so many sessions as a producer and an arranger, at night a lot of the studios were dark, you know. And so I'd call up, you know, an engineer and I'd put together a jam session. I'd call up, you know, this bass player, a drummer, Donald McDonald, Joe Beck, you know, Randy Brecker. Michael Brecker hadn't appeared on the scene yet. But Randy Brecker, Lou Soloff, and, you know, sometimes 5 guys would show up, sometimes 25, 30, you know. So it became like this big, you know, cats would just come there to hang out after a day of playing all sessions, and they were singers, and I started writing for this big band, which is called White Elephant, and that I can show you a picture. Maybe you can get a close-up of it later. It's pretty amazing. We did an album only because one of the engineers started recording the jam sessions. And we put out a double album. That was in like 71. But this started in like 67, 68. And then, I won't go into a long story how I met Gadd. It was through Chuck Mangione, a session that I was booked on by the producer and arranger, Manny Album, you know very well. And there was big band, and all of a sudden there was a guy with a hat, and that was Chuck, walked in, and he was the arranger. And his brother, Gap, they were from Rochester, brought his trio. And in the trio was Steve Gadd, who was from Rochester. Nobody knew who he was. Tony Levin was the bass player, who had just finished, graduated Eastman School of Music. And we said, oh, well, this is going to be a long day. Who are these guys? You know, it's going to be a long session. And anyway, it sounded great. You know, Chuck wrote really some lovely charts. But everybody walked out of that session saying, who the hell was that drummer, man? You know, so I went over and I got his name and Tony's name, and slowly got Steve Gadd to come to New York, and he appears on this album after the original drummer left the group. So out of this group, you know, you wound up with a group called Ars Nova, Dreams, which was Randy and Michael's first group, and some other bands like Blood, Sweat and Tears and Soloff and all those cats. And then later, I put together Mike Mainieri Quintet when I was playing at the Brecker Brothers Club, which was called 7th Avenue South. It wasn't called Steps. And I had 2 groups. I had my electric group with Bob Minzer playing electric bass clarinet.
Wow.
Omar Hakim on drums, who had just gotten out of college. And I'm trying to think who was playing bass. Eddie for a while, but it was an electric bass player who produced Miles. Why can't I think of his name? Marcus Miller.
Yeah.
So Marcus and Omar went to school together. So I had Marcus Miller, Omar Hakim, Warren Bernhardt, and Bob Mincer was my electric quintet that I recorded with and toured with. And then I had the acoustic band with Steve Gadd, Eddie Gomez, Don Grolnick, and Michael Brecker. So I had like 2 bands going. And a Japanese writer happened to come into the club, journalist, I should say. Her name was Kiki Miyake. I still remember Kiki. And she taped one of our gigs and brought it back to Nippon Columbia in Japan. And they loved it. And she offered us, to come to Japan and make a couple of albums. But I couldn't call the band the Mike Mainieri Quintet because I was signed to Warner Brothers with the other band as the Mike Mainieri Quintet. So I gave it a name. I called it Steps, not Steps Ahead. That came later. Am I going too fast and too furious here?
Good.
So we went to Japan with Gadd and Brecker and Grolnick and Eddie, and we played at the Pit Inn, which was a nightclub. 2 sets a night, or maybe 3. And during the day, we recorded another album, like 2 albums. Like it was day and night. We were working. Nobody slept, which came out much later, about a year later. It was called Step by Step. But the original album was called Smoking in the Pit. And it was a huge, huge success in Japan. It was a gold record within 3 months in Japan. And nobody knew who we were here in the States. Absolutely no. We were within 2 years of Smoking in the Pit. We were playing for 5,000 people in Japan. I mean, it was just, you couldn't get in. There were kids at our hotel rooms, like 50, 70 kids, like with signs and like, hi, you're back again. It was like we had this fan club. and then here in the States, we couldn't get any gigs.
Now this was before the Brecker Brothers hit, the Brecker Brothers band.
That's later.
Yeah, that's later.
That's much later.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is 78, 79.
Wow.
No, actually, Grolnick quit because he was, not only got an offer from Linda Ronstadt to be her pianist, but we decided, well, let's play, on our way back from Japan, let's play Hawaii, and then we could play something in LA, and then we could play in Greeley. We got a gig at Greeley, Colorado at a university. And we played this jazz club in Hawaii. There were 6 people in the audience. We just finished playing for almost 10,000 people. It was like, and the critics here, they didn't even know. The album was only released in Japan. But even when we made another, when Gadd left and Peter joined the band, we made one more album as Steps, which was called, what was it called?
Steps. Joe, what was it called?
The third album, Paradox.
Okay.
Paradox, the same band with Michael, but Peter replaced Steve. Because Steve, I think, joined Stuff or some, I forget. But still, nothing. We were playing at just playing at the Brecker Brother Club. We weren't doing that many gigs. But then, when it became Steps Ahead, and there was a reason why we had to add the name, because somebody else had trademarked the name Steps, some band in North Carolina. And then Ileana Elias replaced Don Grolnick, and then we started touring in Europe. That's what sort of broke the band, touring in Europe.
You know what, I made a big mistake. I have all the Steps records from that North Carolina band.
You do?
Yeah,
Please send.
I've asked the wrong person here tonight.
It must be on YouTube. How are they? I'm talking a blue streak here, but I'm trying to get through like all the decades here.
But that's, so what was it that, I mean, looking at it from a consumer point of view, me, for instance, I would buy your records, Steps Ahead, Steps, all the fusion things, the Brecker Brothers, everything from that period, Joni Mitchell's records, Weather Report, thinking that, this is an amazing life, and this is what you guys were kind of new to this music, and this is the scene, and we don't realize it was a long journey to get there.
It was,
and it was a trade-off from playing swing and bebop and jazz into fusion. So you were right there for all that. Was fusion difficult to sell, or would it be instantly popular?
Well, it became popular. Of course, Weather Report. I mean, we played for huge audiences in Europe. I mean, even here, especially Weather Report, more than Steps Ahead. Steps Ahead was never really received very well by the critics. Well, neither was Weather Report in some cases. I think Mr. Gone got one star in Downbeat or something like that.
Boy.
Yeah. So as far as Steps Ahead was concerned, they loved the first album. I don't mean the one that we did in Japan, but the first one that was released here on Elektra Records.
That was just Steps Ahead.
It was just called Steps Ahead.
Yeah.
It was with Ileana Elias. That was well received. This was an acoustic album, basically. Even though I was using some MIDI stuff on the vibes, I guess the critics and whatever couldn't hear that. So they actually liked that. That record got pretty good reviews. But then when we did the next album, which was Modern Times, which a lot of musicians loved that record. We started incorporating some synth sounds and electronics. That's when they just gave us the thumbs down. And even confused our audience. Because I remember Michael telling me, or was one of the guys in the band, said, "Hey, you know what? We came in second in 2 categories." I went, "What do you mean?" And we came in second in Best Acoustic Band and came in second in the Best Electric Band. I said, "Well, how could that be?" How could that? So if we had put all those votes together, we probably would have won in one category. Wow. So it was, not that meant that much to us, but it was just kind of fun, humorous, that.
Can you talk about when you first...
I mean, Weather Report was just like, right from the beginning. It was just one sound coming out of Joe. He wasn't playing acoustic piano or anything. So, but it was a great band. And Return to Forever, that all started happening. The Mahavishnu Orchestra was amazing.
Well, I know you were very close to Mike Brecker. Can you talk about when you first heard him and first met him?
First met him at a White Elephant. Can I bring my brother in, Randy, for a jam session? Jam. We didn't even call it a jam session. Whoever showed up, their wives, kids, and everything.
Because he would have been coming from Indiana, from school, right? I
guess so. I mean, I know they're from Philly, but I don't know.
Both him and Randy went to the University of Indiana.
Right.
Or IU, I think.
No. But he came to town. I don't know if that was when I first met him.
Yeah.
Was on one of our nightly...
How did he impress you?
Well, as soon as he got up and played, because he played the chart, but as soon as he got up and played the solo, the other guys, and Ronnie Cuba, pretty good sax section, George Young, Frank Ficcari, and everybody just went, "What? What's this?" What the hell? Where did he come from? It's just like an alien just landed,
Yeah.
It was kind of like that with Gadd, too, let me tell you. There was just he turned some heads. And Tony Williams, too. It's like when Tony.
Yeah.
Just like... So
once all those guys finally got heard, they started to rise up into the scene? Or what happened? Was it that easy? I mean, I shouldn't say easy. It's for somebody like Michael Brecker to come to New York, be heard, realize, hey, this is something new. And what does he do? What happens? Well,
Randy was already an established session player. I mean, these guys were not going on the road. There was so much money to be made as a session musician. And you made a choice. You either just like, you became a touring band, and that's what you did. That was your focus, and that was your life, And that was great, too. And remaining in New York and playing all these different sessions, even though some of them were just like nightmares, But, in my case, I had a family. I had quite a few children, And I liked the idea, for me, that I could, write for television and make some pretty good money to feed the family, and then do something with Wes Montgomery or Jim Hall on a session, you know, on a record, or write an arrangement for Aerosmith, which I did for a symphony orchestra on Toys in the Attic. I'm giving you a plug, Stephen.
So, you know, I guess the question is, you've done all these things, but when you started out, when you were like 16, 17, you probably had no idea where this was heading. I mean, who does?
No. Well, you know, it's dreams. It's dreams manifesting something that's real out of dreams. I mean, because I, you know, grew up with the radio, no telephone, no television, radio and movies and live Broadway shows. So you just like, I could be there. I could play with Benny Goodman. And I mentioned before, he called me to play a gig, and I couldn't make it. But I mean, you know, for me, it was a dream come true, but I dreamt that. It wasn't like I didn't think it was impossible. But there was an environment there that allowed me to, you know, to, of course, flourish.
So it's probably exciting.
That scene doesn't exist now for these young people.
Right.
There aren't 25 recording studios in New York and maybe 20, 30 different dates going on every day. You know, at RCA, you know, Perry Como session, there's Sinatra session, there's jingles from 2 to 4. I mean, you could be a B player and read really well and still keep pretty busy in New York. I don't mean B like bad, I mean, but you didn't have to be like the A on the A list. Those guys were really.
Was it shocking to see some jazz artists that you thought were purists coming in to do a Maxwell House Coffee commercial? No, because I know what the residuals paid. You know, Mel and Thad, you know, they did some touring, but you know, I don't know how many sessions I was on with Mel. On some. Did you know Toots Thielmans? Well, Toots, I knew Toots before the session. I met Toots when I was about 20 years old, and he was living in Yonkers. When I moved to Yonkers from the Bronx, he was my neighbor, and he and I were doing little crappy club gigs up in Westchester. And he was only playing guitar with me. And I would drive him home every night. And he just lived like 2 miles from my house less. And I remember when I first heard Bluesette on the radio with him, I didn't even know he played harmonica. He never mentioned it or whistled. So we became friends our entire life, and I played on his duet album, West Coast, East Coast. We did a lot of sessions together, and he was really, really a beautiful cat, and special musician, and did me the ultimate favor when he no longer played guitar. I put together, these are great albums, I'm going to plug them. I did 2 volumes of guitar players playing their favorite Beatles tune. And I had all kinds of names, you know. Everybody from like Adrian Belew, like somebody like that, to Holsworth, Steve Kahn, Larry Coryell. I mean, all the Abercrombie, everybody played their favorite Beatles tune. And I asked Toots if he would play guitar, because it's a guitar album. And he says, I haven't played the guitar in years. I said, you got to do it for me. Just do me one favor. He said, okay. You know, he came in. Kenny Werner was playing with piano with him and his arranger. Kenny did this beautiful arrangement of Michelle. And he not only played guitar and whistled, you know, like the chorus, right? Then he played harmonica too at the end when it modulated. It was just like, man, I had tears. I was like crying. I was in the studio when I heard it. Well, he told me that he made his money whistling the Old Spice deodorant commercial.
Yeah, well,
and that allowed him to move from Yonkers.
I'm so happy for him. Why not?
Because it would play every sports event on the weekends.
I sang, I sing on this album. I sang, because I had a jingle company, I just sang a tag for one-a-day vitamins. Oh, should we be talking about this at all?
Sure.
But the singers made the money. They made all the money. They made, because their residuals, the way it worked is like every time it was played, they get paid. Whereas as a musician, they could play it 1 million times. Every 13 weeks, you'd get a residual, a fee. But if you sang, it was a whole different thing. I sang something on one-a-day vitamins. It was just a little tag. It was like 5 notes on a demo, and I wanted to hire a professional singer, but the ad guy just said, no, we like your version, and I made more money from that stupid commercial than I did from everything else I made that year. Just
wow. Can you sing it for us now?
No, I'm interested not. Absolutely not.
Hey, I want you to tell one more story. The State Department tour with Buddy Rich.
Yes. What do you want to know? No, I guess this was 1961, John F. Kennedy, his cultural exchange tours. I guess I could look out for you folks now. And so they hired a fellow by the name of Joey Adams, who was an old vaudevillian. Straw hat, cane, tap dancing, ta-da! Everything ended like that. And then they hired the Four-Step Brothers, who were fantastic tap dancers, and they hired 3 young ladies, like the Lennon sisters, or Lemons, whatever they were called, So they had 3 girls singing kind of this corny kind of, I know I shouldn't say the corny, but it was, in its day, it was, I know them, and they're good friends of mine.
It was probably popular on TV.
It was popular, and they were very lovely girls from, and they also had, this is how insane this tour was, and this is how our tax dollars are spent sometimes. They had a woman who was a magician who had birds that flew out of these veils that she had, right? So that was part of our act. They had a guy that blew up balloons and would make little animals out of them and would put it on his wife's head. She was part of the team. So it was like a vaudeville, because that's all this guy, Joey Adams. And his wife is still alive, Cindy Adams. She has a gossip columnist in the New York Post. She's had it for the last 50 years. So they went out there, and there was some more of these corny acts. And then Buddy Rich we were going to back the acts. Of course, Buddy wouldn't do that. I wanted to play drums, and I would back them. And he would only play for the Four-Step Brothers, and he'd go out there and tap dance with them. His buddy was a pretty good tap dancer. And then I would sit behind the drums. And so, make a very long story short, because this tour went on for months. Our first gig was in Kabul, Afghanistan. Hello, New York, Kabul, 1961. We're in the middle of nowhere, and they set up the stage. We had, our own stage, generators, lights,
in the
camera.
desert.
We're in the fucking desert. Whoops. In the middle of nowhere. We'll have to bleep that. And why are we here? And there was this huge movie screen behind us that they set up. And what they were basically, we were selling jet planes. They were just, because we were competing with the Russians who were in Kabul. They were like smart enough to be in the city and perform. So we were there, I forget how long, too long, actually, because everyone got dysentery within 3 days, which we call the Kabul Trots. And it followed us through India, or New Delhi, Bangalore, what was Bombay then, Calcutta, Madras. Then we went to Nepal. We played in Kathmandu, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. We played for the prince, who was now the king of Thailand. It was a jazz
saxophone player.
Right. We played for a show, for him with the balloon guy and And then he invited us, Buddy, to back, come to my palace with your band and we'll have a jam session, which, that was fun. While we were at the palace, we had to couldn't be any taller than him. You had to be and then back out of the room kind of thing. Which of course Buddy Rich loved that. And so we went to his private quarters, whatever they were, this room where we jammed with him. He's kind of a Dixieland player, and he gave us this beautiful solid silver cigarette case with a gold coat of arms on it, which I still have, and I don't know, treasure it, but it's worth something, I think. And then we just went played in Saigon, played for the Shah of Iran, we played in for another dictator, and it was Sarkonov in Indonesia at the time. So we were all over the world. But long story short was, did I say long story short before I got into this long story? Buddy had problems with, always had problems with the liaison people from the State Department, because they would come in and give us a little, these are the rules here, this is what you have to do. And he hated really doing that. He was just sick and tired of the whole, scam. It was really pretty awful, because we got to play at the end of the show. Then he had to go out and tap dance, and everything was da-da. It was really funny in Kabul because it was like about 20,000 Afghans out there, sitting out there. And everything ended with this. It was a total silence, It was just like nothing. And the thing that they really loved was the balloons. They just went nuts for the balloons. And the first show we did, Joey Adams decided to blow up all these tons of balloons and throw them to the audience, which caused a tremendous riot because everybody rushed the stage to get balloons, and then some of these people really got bloodied up. So that we stopped doing that. But there's two stories to this. There's two endings. One is that Buddy left the tour. He said to me, Mike, let's go back to New York. We'll get Helfman, who was a roadie, to play drums or something like that, and finish the show, because they wanted to get rid of Buddy anyway, the State Department. He was giving them too trouble. And I said, no, we can't leave the guys here. The next day, he was gone. So I wound up being billed as Buddy Rich.
Wow.
Who knew in Phnom Penh, in Saigon, or Madras, India.
You develop an attitude at that point?
Well, I had an attitude being from the Bronx. I had then, when I was younger, I had a little bit of an attitude. That's why he and I got along, because we'd probably we'd be on the floor pounding each other. So. but I always had a great time with him. Wow. Because there's so many stories from the '70s with this band. Because he took me. I went everywhere with him. I drove all of his sports cars with the guys, and I did all the arrangements. I hired all the musicians. I hung out with him, with Lenny Bruce and Sinatra and the Rat Pack and Mel Torme and Jerry Lewis, all of his buddies, all of his Hollywood. So I was with him all the time. So come on, let's go. Did
you feel comfortable in that scene?
Sure, yeah.
You hang out with Sinatra, was that comfortable?
It was like the Bronx. It was a little bit Bronx, It was wild, It was.
And
you could watch the Playboy, Hugh Hefner show.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube. There was only one Playboy club, so it had its.
And I'm sure you played the Playboy Club.
We played on the Playboy Club, and we played the TV show. And appeared on the TV show, and then went to the club later when they would close it down, everybody, and it was just one big party.
Well, we're just about out of time.
No.
I know, right?
We only got to the 70s.
I know. We'll have
and
to have
Buddy
you
Rich.
come back. I'm sorry. We're going to do part 2 another night. That's all right with you.
Okay.
All right. But, you know, because, I mean, we're just at the 70s, and there's so much more. Your record label, NYC Records, and this is when I first started hearing you and your music and Steps Ahead and American Diary and all that stuff. But, you know, I think we'll close this segment by saying that you revealed that growing up you were surrounded by a nurturing environment with all types of music and entertainment and things that inspired you. Seeing what's around today, what you have any advice for all these guys here? How do they find that same inspiration?
I know it's a question that I'm asked everywhere I go, whether I'm doing a workshop or clinic or just playing somewhere, and a young musician will come up to me and say, you did all these things, and I don't. It's a really hard question to answer. I'm sure there's, my philosophy might be different than other musicians, who just would say we're more purists, that's totally great and it's cool. I was interested in lots of different genres. After that tour at Buddy Rich, the wonderful thing that did happen was I got a chance to hear all this music, folk music, in every country, and it really opened up my head, because I was just like jazz, bebop, and then that turned my head around, and when I came back to New York, I decided I'm going to stay in New York because there's other things starting to percolate, which was the jazz, rock, and folk music, like Joni Mitchell, just young and coming on the scene, and getting a chance to play on their records, and moving up to Woodstock in '69, which I did. I raised my family up there, and being up there with, Jack DeJohnette was up there, and Carla Bley, who you interviewed, and there was so many. The music was happening up there. Everybody was playing at this club called the Joyous Lake. Everybody played there, including Mingus. Sonny lived nearby, so. We could talk about. Did
you go to the Woodstock concert too? The big festival?
I was going to play with. I couldn't get there I was living across the river. I had a farm. We could talk about my farm. I had a 100-acre farm. I was a farmer, on a weekend farmer for a while. I couldn't get to the. I got like 3 miles from where my farm was, and then the traffic just stopped, and I just sat there for about 6 hours and 7 hours, and I just went, forget about it. I turned around. I went,
Who were you supposed to play with?
Tim Hardin. We were going to sit in with Tim, Warren and I. But anyway, to be continued, I guess.
To be continued. We've run out of time. Well, you didn't end your words of wisdom.
Well, I think. Well, let's see. Technology is the future. I mean, it's coming. It's here, and it's always been. It's ever since I started playing. Like I said, I only had a radio, and then I had a phonograph, and then we had TV, and then from TV we had, and then I amplified my vibraphone. Then I started playing with the guitar players that were turning it up, and then there were electric keyboards and electric, and it's just, it's unstoppable, really. So, you either embrace it and be a part of it and make sure that, you get your voice, your voice gets out there. And I think it's possible. Or you can, take the road that's not traveled as well and just, try to make it as a, whatever you decide, if it's an acoustic player or something like that, or with your own band.
Because I could imagine, as you don't know what's coming up next.
You never know. I mean, I was open to, I wrote a theme song for a movie called The Lost Boys, and which was not a hit movie at all. Joel Schumacher was a really great cast. This is back in the 90s or something like that. It's become a cult classic now. Did I ever dream that Eminem was going to take a piece of that thing and or, you know, not that I've ever bought one of his records, but I certainly cashed that check.
Hey, that's all we need to hear.
When you have 8 kids,
right? Wow.
you know.
Okay, Mike Mainieri, everybody.